Having served in Sydney's infamous red light district of King's Cross and dared to enter the ghettos of Los Angeles, former police officer and photojournalist Brett Stephens is all too familiar with street gangs.
In his new book, A Hard Place, Stephens exposes the culture of gangs, their impact on Australian communities, and his thoughts on suppressing these violent groups. And we welcome author Brett Stephens to the show. Nice to see you, Brett. Take us back to the 80s. I remember growing up in the 80s. I was a teenager on the run from punks or skinheads. There were definitely no-go zones in Sydney.
Yep.
What was King's Cross like?
King's Cross was extremely violent and, by the way, as a cop, extremely fun, right? Because I was very comfortable with the violence and because of that I found it extremely fun. So there was lots of action. 8 hours would just fly by like that.
You spent a lot of years in the US. You studied, I guess, the police tactics and you studied gun culture there. What was the biggest difference that you found between their gangs and our gangs?
It's the availability of firearms, illegal firearms for those guys, but also the fact that a lot of guys particularly were coming up from Latin America and they were very comfortable with shooting and murder. And that came through into the ghettos, basically, of South Los Angeles.
Sure. You brought that knowledge back to Australia. How did it help you understand our homegrown gangs?
Well, I got a feel of what was going on in regards to why a lot of these young men want to join the gang for a start. They love to be part of a warrior culture, so to speak, and people have respect from people. Maybe they got no respect, you know, in the neighbourhood or the home environment that they're working in. But then I started to realise that it was all linked to the whole drug trade and moving that drugs, you know, through America, but also Australia.
Is it that people that you're talking about, I guess boys was predominantly what we're talking about, who join gangs are because they feel that they need a sense of belonging?
Yes, that's part of it. They belong to something that is brutal. Yep. And ruthless, and everybody else will have respect for them because they're, first of all, how do they get into that gang for the first place? They don't just let anybody in. You know, you've got to be someone with credibility and capability. And so, but particularly the Mexican gangs, the Latino gangs, I mean, they weren't broken families. They had fathers, but they were norteños and their grandfathers were norteños. So you had that different slanting
Family
situation.
Lineage, yeah, for sure. What are some of the most notorious gangs in Australia?
I say the Rebels because they're about 2,500 members, so they've got one of the largest memberships and numbers do count. But at the moment, I mean, Apex is on a lot of people's lips down in Melbourne, and that's because they've got that capability to be extremely brutal. And those guys are coming from war zones, and anyone who comes from a war zone, the violent minority that comes with that peaceful majority that leaves there, are going to be far more violent than what we've got or experienced.
One of the things that you believe is that the decriminalisation or the legalisation of drugs would help to, I guess, solve a lot of these gang-related issues. Why is that?
Well, I looked at the Australia 21 report and we had ex-commissioners and prison chiefs and everybody else saying, look, we should be looking at this. And I look back at the time, and I'll look back at Los Angeles. There was a young guy, the cop was telling me this story, he arrested a young guy for having some marijuana on him. And so that's a misdemeanor charge. And then he didn't turn up at court because, you know, he's a bit of an airhead. So that's a felony. And then he didn't do it again, it's a felony. So now he's got a misdemeanor and 2 felonies. Now he's in prison. For what? A bit of marijuana. Right, and pretty much everyone in a lot of those communities, that's their poison. They drink beer, but they also like to smoke marijuana, maybe do some cocaine and that type of thing. And then I started thinking back to all the drug addicts I dealt with in King's Cross, and I was pretty heartless back then. I was always thinking, yeah, them dying is a positive. But then I started thinking about their families and the terrible predicament they're in, and I started realising it's more of a sickness rather than let's stop treating it like crime and filling up our prisons and go like America. You don't want to be like America. Yeah,
it's going to be a long road to get there, though, I reckon. Brett, I want to ask you this question. Do you think that any Australian gangs have links to terrorist organisations?
Well, some do, because there's, if you see often with the shooters with the terrorists, many of them seem to have been gang members at some stage beforehand, so they're very comfortable with violence and that indoctrination. So there's an indoctrination process in the gangs, very similar to the indoctrination process with terrorism. And I learnt this, that when I was listening to gangster rap a lot, I actually started thinking doing drive-bys and being a gangster was pretty cool. And I'm a middle-aged father with, you know, ex-cop and everything. Why is that happening? it was because I was being indoctrinated with that music. And then I did a counter-terrorism course with a ex-Navy SEAL, and we were watching all these American soldiers getting blown up. It was all set to music, and he said, "How cool is the music?" And I went, "Oh my God, it's the same process."
Right, okay, infiltrating it in.
That's right.
Yeah.
Brett, terrific to have you with us. Thank you.
Thanks, Brett.
For all the details about Brett Stevens' book, it's called A Hard Place. The details are on the Daily Edition website.